kind of wild, right? When you look at someone like Elon Musk, you see these huge successes, but also like rockets blowing up, stock prices all over the place, and that whole Twitter thing.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people scratching their heads about that one.
But, I mean, he keeps moving forward, and there's this clear upward trajectory.
Yeah.
So what's the secret sauce? What's driving this kind of chaotic success?
Well, from these sources you sent over, it seems like a big part of it comes down to something called the 10x rule.
And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today, right?
Exactly.
So for everyone listening, we're going deep on this 10x rule,
Uh,
what it is, how Musk uses it, and most importantly, how you can actually use it too.
Absolutely. And it doesn't matter what you do or what your expertise is. This is about a whole new way of thinking about goals and challenges.
Right on. It's like we're always told to set realistic goals, right? To go for slow and steady growth.
Yeah, play it safe. Incremental changes.
But this 10x rule, it's like throwing all that out the window.
It really is. It's about setting goals that are 10 times bigger than what you'd normally consider.
Like so much bigger, it might seem kind of crazy at first.
Yeah, and it's not just about the potential for bigger rewards, although that's definitely part of it.
Totally. It's more about how aiming that high changes everything.
Exactly. The amount of effort you put in, how you solve problems, everything gets supercharged.
Okay, think about it this way. If your goal is to improve something by just 10%, you're probably going to stick with what you already know. Just tweak things a little.
Right, the familiar strategies. But when you aim for a 1,000% increase, like the 10x rule suggests, that just won't cut it.
You're forced to think differently. You got to innovate.
And be okay with some very public failures along the way. Like, remember those early SpaceX launches that went, not so well?
Oh yeah, those rocket explosions were hard to miss.
Yeah.
Or the Cybertruck window demo, that didn't go quite as planned.
For most people, those would be huge setbacks. But for Musk, they're like part of the process.
It's kind of like he expects them to happen, and he's ready for it.
That's a great point. It actually ties into this idea of calculated risk that some of your sources mentioned. It's not just about taking blind leaps.
It's about knowing what you're getting into.
Yeah. Like, there's this worst-case survival test where you only pursue things where you can handle the absolute worst possible outcome.
So even if everything goes wrong, you can still bounce back.
Right. Remember when Musk almost went bankrupt back in 2008? That's a pretty good example. He knew the risks and was prepared to deal with them.
Okay, so we've got this idea of setting huge goals, putting in massive effort, knowing you'll probably fail along the way, and being able to handle the worst case.
Right.
Now let's see how Musk actually puts this into practice. Tesla's a good example.
Yeah, good one.
When they first started, I remember a lot of people, even big names in the car industry, were really skeptical about electric vehicles.
Totally. Thought it was a niche thing, never going to go mainstream. There was even a quote from a GM CEO in one of your sources, basically dismissing EVs.
But Tesla, they didn't just want to build a slightly better electric car. They wanted to make electric cars cool, like really desirable.
That's the 10x thinking right there. They weren't just competing on, being eco-friendly or fuel efficient. They went for performance, design, the whole package.
They changed how people thought about electric cars. And, well, I guess a company valuation over $800 billion says something, right?
Yeah, no kidding. That's what happens when you set a crazy goal and completely shake up an industry.
Now, what about SpaceX? That whole idea of landing rockets vertically so they can be reused, that seemed like pure science fiction at first.
It did. And remember those early attempts? 3 failed launches in a row.
Oh yeah, I was glued to the screen for those. Must have been intense for them.
For sure. Most companies would have given up after that, called it a day.
But they had this huge vision for SpaceX, right? Revolutionize space travel, make life multiplanetary, and that kept them going.
Totally. And look at them now, leading the private space industry. That first Falcon rocket landing, that wasn't just a cool technical achievement.
It was proof that aiming high, even when it seems impossible, can actually work.
Exactly. They made it real.
And then, of course, there's Twitter, or X as it is now. Buying a struggling social media platform, making all these big changes, losing billions of dollars. Didn't make much sense to a lot of people.
Yeah, on the surface, it seemed like a risky move.
But if you think about it in terms of the 10x rule, it starts to make more sense.
Right. It's about controlling a major platform for news and information.
With a global communication network.
Mm-hmm.
And even though there were big financial losses initially, it seems like they're seeing some real growth in users.
Yeah. I mean, Musk himself has said, if you're not failing, you're not innovating enough. It's about pushing the limits, even if it costs you in the short term.
So the 10x rule, it's not just about setting huge goals, it's also about having a certain mindset.
Definitely.
Your sources talk about first principles thinking. What exactly is that?
Well, it's basically breaking down a problem to its most basic parts, like stripping away all the assumptions, the usual ways of doing things, and starting from scratch.
So you're not just accepting things at face value, you're questioning everything.
Right. Like, remember the example with the cost of building rockets? NASA was spending something like $65 million per rocket.
Yeah, they had their way of doing things.
But Musk's team, they went back to basics, analyzed the materials, the processes, everything, and they figured out they could build a rocket for closer to $6 million.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It's about asking why over and over until you get to the core of the issue.
Makes sense. Another thing your sources talk about is avoiding the sunk cost fallacy. That's
Yeah.
something I think we all struggle with sometimes.
It's a tough one to avoid.
Yeah. We keep doing something even when it's clearly not working, just because we've already invested so much time or money.
Exactly. And what's interesting about Musk is that he seems really good at letting go of those past investments, even if it means making some tough decisions.
Like, remember the layoffs at Twitter? It was a controversial move, but you could argue it was about focusing on the future, not dwelling on past decisions.
Yeah, making the changes needed, even if they're difficult. It's about prioritizing the bigger picture.
There's this idea of inverse survival bias. That was a new one for me.
Me too.
So basically, it's about accepting that failure is highly likely, especially when you're aiming really high.
Right. Your sources mention something like 90% of startups failing.
That's a sobering statistic.
It is, but the 10x mindset, it's not about being discouraged by those odds. It's about factoring them in.
So you know it's probably not going to work out most of the time, but you go for it anyway because when you do succeed, it's huge.
Exactly. I really like that quote from Musk. I'd rather be optimistic and wrong than pessimistic and right.
Yeah, it's about taking action, even if there's a good chance you'll fail.
Right. Taking those risks because the potential payoff is so big.
Okay, all of this is super interesting when we're talking about these massive companies and world-changing ideas. But for someone listening who's dealing with everyday challenges, how can they use this 10x thinking?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How to make this relevant to our own lives.
Right. Like it can't all be about launching rockets and disrupting entire industries.
Well, one suggestion that came up in your sources is to double your stupid goal. Sounds kind of funny, right?
Yeah, a bit provocative, but I like where this is going.
The idea is to set a goal that seems almost ridiculous at first. Like if you were thinking about earning $100,000, aim for $1 million instead.
Whoa, okay, I see what you mean about stupid goals. But why do that?
Because it forces you to think completely differently. You can't hit those kinds of goals using the same old methods.
You have to be more creative, find new solutions,
Yeah.
like pushing your brain to work harder.
Exactly. And then there's this idea of burning the boats.
Now, that sounds pretty intense.
It is a powerful image, right? It comes from those stories of generals who would burn their ships after landing in enemy territory.
So there's no going back. You're all in.
Exactly. And there's a parallel with Musk putting his last $20 million into Tesla when it was struggling. By removing any backup plan, you increase your commitment.
You have to give it your all because there's no other option.
Right. And that can be really powerful even if you're not dealing with millions of dollars. It's about creating that sense of urgency and commitment in whatever you're doing.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, last one. Sell the dream first. I think the image of that Tesla Roadster in space is a perfect example of this.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That wasn't just a publicity stunt. It was a brilliant way to get people excited about the future Tesla and SpaceX were building.
It showed that they were thinking big, pushing boundaries.
Exactly. And selling the dream first is about getting people to believe in your vision before it becomes reality, inspiring yourself and others.
So pulling it all together, what we're seeing with Elon Musk and this 10x rule is that it's not just about luck or genius.
It's about having this incredibly bold approach, setting crazy ambitious goals that force you to think differently.
Yeah. Accepting failure as part of the process, understanding your limits, and having that unwavering commitment to your vision.
It's definitely inspiring. So for everyone listening, I want to leave you with this. What would your own 10x move be? What could you achieve if you aimed 10 times higher?
Yeah, think about it. We're not saying you have to launch a rocket or become the next Elon Musk, but what if you took a step back and looked at where you might be playing it too safe?
What possibilities open up when you push yourself beyond your comfort zone, even in a small way? It's something to think about.
It is.